2, 1. Good morning. If I look all stripy, it's because the sun is coming through my shades over here this morning. It's definitely getting fallish as the sunrise is changed and this position of the sun has changed. But good morning, everyone. I'm just going to get up on TikTok as well, which I can do through this software, but it winds up I don't see the comments, and then people accuse me of ignoring them. So I'm not going to try to do that. By the way, I don't ignore any comments. If you're on Facebook, for example, or YouTube and watching this as a replay, well, particularly Facebook, if you're watching this as a replay, comments will come up as people were commenting live as you're watching the video. So if you're like 10 minutes into the video and somebody comments, that will come up as if it's real time. So I've had people accuse me of ignoring their comments who were commenting like an hour. Good morning. We're commenting like an hour after the live ended. So I don't want anybody to think I'm ignoring them. I don't, to the best of my ability, I'm a human being, don't ignore anybody's comments. Obviously if you're, a troll or something like that, you might get, you might get blocked, or I might not address it. But anybody who's just saying normal things, I normally do my best to try to address it. If I miss something, I miss something, but I'm not purposefully ever ignoring anybody. So hope everybody is having a good, it's Thursday. This is a weird day. This is a weird week. It's been a weird month for me. I got my first daughter off to college on Sunday, having all the feels about that. My next daughter goes to college tomorrow, having all the feels about that. So good morning to you all. Thank you for joining. So I thought I would talk about symbol and metaphor today, and their importance and ways that we can use them to start to create greater levels of communication with our unconscious. Why would we want to do that? Because our unconscious runs the show. We feel like we're the captain of the ship, and sometimes we are. We set intention consciously, and then we hope our unconscious does the correct thing and carries it out. But most of your experience, some comments in this live, see, this is telling me that some comments have been censored, and I can't see what they are. So I apologize if that is the case. Is it Jeff just meeting people on dating apps and getting ghosted repeatedly after the first date? I have no idea what you're talking about, unless you're responding to a comment that I didn't see, which is possible. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I want to talk today about symbol and metaphor, how important they are to us, to our, particularly to our unconscious mind. And so you know that you have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, right? So if I say to you, for example, what color is your mailbox? You can probably, you might have to think about it a little bit. You might have to picture it or whatever, but you can most likely come up with that. But that wasn't in your consciousness until I asked you, right? And you say, well, I retrieved it from memory. True. How did you retrieve it from memory? What was the process? Do you know? Doubtful, right? It was an unconscious process. If you want to get up and walk across the room to another part of the room, unless you are just learning how to walk or relearning how to walk after some sort of injury or sickness or something, you don't have to concentrate on that consciously, right? That is relegated to your unconscious. Your unconscious is responsible for things like keeping your system regulated, keeping your heart beating, keeping you breathing. You can consciously take over your breath. If you practice long enough, you can consciously affect your heart rate, right? But if something were to come into our perception that frightened us, for example, our heart rate would suddenly increase. We would have all kinds of reactions in the body that we're not consciously in control of. Now, we can gain some conscious control over these things. We can learn to do breath work. We can learn to do some autonomic training, some biofeedback, things like that, and have some control over our physiology, but very little. And we don't want to, right? Who wants to have to concentrate on digesting our food? Who wants to have to concentrate on regulating our pH level of our blood? Right? It would be too much. So that's relegated to the unconscious. So that's just physiological processes, right? So there are lots of other processes that are going on in your unconscious mind. If I tell you a joke, particularly this comes up with wordplay. So things that have like double meanings or something. If I say like, I mean, this is stupid dad joke stuff, but what's that in the road? Ahead, right? There's some syntactic ambiguity based on how I phrase that. Like, what's that in the road? Is there a head in the road, or what's that in the road ahead, meaning ahead of me, right? There's some ambiguity there. And your mind will go back and forth. Your mind will search for meanings. It will cling to the first one that makes the most sense. But then afterwards, sometimes, if you've ever had that thing where like a joke has hit sometime later, a few minutes later, even up to a few days later, you go, oh, yeah. What's going on is that there's a part of your unconscious mind that's still processing in the background. And I think that's very cool. I think it's a very cool thing. If you've ever tried to remember a name or something, like, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember it, and then a day later or something, it pops into your mind when you weren't thinking about it consciously, what's happening is your unconscious mind is still working on it. If you are a great one I like to talk about, because my first name is John, so that's very common. When I was a child, it was the most common English language boy's name there was. So I grew up with a lot of people named John, and there were instances where people would call out the name John, and I didn't necessarily know if they were talking to me or somebody else. You're in a restaurant, there's a number of people in the restaurant. There may be 10 or 12 conversations happening around you. You cannot possibly pay attention to all of those conversations. All of a sudden, somebody says your first name. What happens? You perk up and pay attention. How did that happen if some part of you was not aware of that conversation? And the answer is it doesn't. Some part of you was aware of that conversation. Some part of you was aware of every conversation you could perceive simultaneously. You just can't hold all of that in your conscious mind. But your unconscious mind is the more powerful part of your mind, right? It can hold millions of bits of information coming in every second. There are millions of bits of information coming in from your senses, but also your internal process. Come here, Phoebes. The cat wants to get involved, but she's like, jump up, jump down. Here's Phoebe. Good morning, everybody. Phoebe would like to say good morning to you. She'd really like all the attention, but it's a little hard if I'm going to chat with you at the same time. So all of this is to point out just how powerful your unconscious mind is. It's incredibly important to understand that, particularly if you're doing any sort of personal development work, any sort of therapy. A lot of our traumas, past wounds, things like that are held in the unconscious part of ourselves. This is a lot of what Freud and Jung were talking about, right? The unconscious mind. A lot of our learning is unconscious, right? We can focus on learning things, but we learn a lot unconsciously, particularly as children. We absorb things like sponges. We learn to talk unconsciously, right? We don't, it's like, I remember, because I have kids, I remember it would be like, they're not saying anything one day, and then my one of my daughter's first words was her first word was hippie, because I used to say all the time, she had like crazy hair. It was like she had this like curly hair. It was all over the place. And I would say, as a joke, I'd say, Sophia, you look like a hippie. And so she started saying hippie, hippie, hippie. And then we'd laugh. It would reinforce the learning. But she wasn't trying to learn the word hippie. She wasn't consciously, okay, I'm going to put this she didn't have those processes. It just happens on an unconscious level. And as it turns out, the way that we learn things, or the way that we learn things the best, is through associations, through things like symbols, things like metaphors. And there is a deeper part of us that communicates through symbols and metaphors. This is what dreaming is about, right? I dreamed of a statue of my third grade teacher, and it had cracks in it. And then, a lot of some dreams are not that metaphoric, not that symbolic. Sometimes it's just like pure anxiety or something coming up. But very often when we have those weird dreams, there's a lot to pull out of them. It's the unconscious coming forward and trying to communicate with us. So let's get into that a little bit. So as it turns out, there are very few universal things regarding language, right? There's certain rules, like, as far as I know, all languages have things like verbs and nouns, right? You have things and actions, right? Because language has to describe things and actions. That's pretty universal. But I mean, as far as meanings go, as far as metaphors go, there are very few universals. One universal that seems to be the case for just about every language, or every language they've studied, is that things that are big, that bigness is associated with importance. We have the idea of the big boss, the big cheese. In English, we have the big cheese, the big chief, the big boss, right? Bigness is important. Oh, he's a big star. He's a big, figure in this. He's big in his industry, right? Big is important. And the theory about where this comes from is that our first experience with people in this world is with our caregivers, who are feeding us, clothing us, and hola papi. I don't speak Spanish, so I can't read that, unfortunately, but I think that says you're from Guatemala. And welcome. Welcome from Guatemala. Very cool to have you on. So bigness in just about every language is associated with something important, right? So I hate to have to do this. I have to walk away for just a second. I have to check on my dog, who I think needs to come in from outside. I will be right back in about 3 seconds, maybe a little more than 3 seconds. But sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, the animals know when I'm like live or talking to somebody or whatever, and they'll like ignore me all morning until I'm talking, and then they're like, now it's time for you to pay attention to us. So anyway, let me get back to it. So one universal metaphor, as you will, or comparison, is that big is associated with important, right? We learn through association. We learn by making connections between things. If you think about how the brain works, right? Synapses firing. On a physical level, this makes a lot of sense, right? And I'm going to muff the actual statistic here. I'm paraphrasing some linguistic studies, but they say, like, in a minute of speech, an average person's speech, there are something like 15 metaphors in there that we're not even usually aware of, right? There are, of course, exceptions. This is an average of lots of people speaking in lots of different contexts and that sort of thing. Good morning to you, my dear friend, my divinely excellent friend. How are you this morning? We're talking about metaphor and symbolism as a language of the unconscious mind, and the unconscious mind also being our connection to spirit, which I haven't stated yet, but I'm stating it now. Just having my coffee, which is delightful this morning. It's delightful every morning. I still need to find out if any culture has a deity associated with coffee, so I can build an altar to that deity. If not, I'm going to create a coffee deity, and then I know, like, uh, it's one of the really interesting things to me is the use of quasi-religious symbology and stuff in advertising and marketing. So if you look at Starbucks logo, it's a mermaid, but it's a very specific thing, mythological thing, and it's iconic, right? And the word icon comes from images, from religious images, right? Um, so it's very interesting. So there is this concept of an egregore, which is a being that is created through group consciousness, through very interesting. Um, there's a very they're not as active as they used to be, but there was a very interesting group called the IoT, and I can't remember what they stood for, but it was basically a collective of people doing chaos magic, online and getting together. And one of these people created a sigil, which is a symbol, not usually a symbol that's representative, but a symbol called the sigil, called the linking sigil, or LS, right? And there was a purpose behind the sigil, was to enchant the world, to bring more magic into the world. And people were like putting it on stickers and putting it under counters at restaurants and painting it on bridges and graffiti and doing all of these things. And over time, the idea was, and I haven't played with any of this stuff, I'm just recalling things that I've read about it. But over time, became like this deity that they called Elis. So LS, the linking sigil, they created this idea of this goddess called Elis, and do work with that. And it is interesting, because as far as spiritual work goes, it seems, from the chaos magicians do a lot of experimentation. They're somewhat scientifically minded and sort of like, we're going to try this and see how it works. And there's a lot of reports of this stuff working. And in fact, there's a book on that comes out of the chaos magic sort of stream of consciousness, I guess, on pop culture magic. So using symbols like Superman, for example, as a god on an altar. And how is that different than using Odin, for example, on an altar, other than the ancient connections and the actual, origin within spirituality? It's an interesting set of thoughts. It was not one I've explored a whole lot, but metaphorically, symbolically, what does Superman represent, right? And if we think about the consciousness aspect of spirituality, what does Superman represent? Represents honesty, represents strength, represents these abilities, this idea of goodness, right, of helping others. So there could be far worse figures to put on an altar, I guess. So if you take a consciousness view, if the idea of a deity does not have to necessarily be some primordial being that existed before humanity, and that they are in fact somewhat metaphoric, then that is perhaps an effective use. I don't know. So let's talk about symbols in the unconscious a little bit more, and sort of depth stuff. I'll get into dreaming a little bit, and talk about some different ways to use symbols and metaphors in your own life. It doesn't have to be spiritual, but just some ways to explore the unconscious. But what I want to say is that one of the things that holds people back sometimes from exploring the side of themselves is the idea that anything we know we have to be able to explain, right? There's this idea like if you really know something, you'll be able to explain it to a 10-year-old. And that may be true for sort of technical things, right? Like if I can explain how to make a make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If I really know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I can teach that to a 10-year-old or younger, right? Or explain it to a 5-year-old. I can do that pretty easily. What I cannot probably do, because I don't understand it well enough, is explain the bonding of the various metals in the alloys in the knife that I use to spread the peanut butter, because I don't understand that well enough. But I don't have to make a peanut butter sandwich, right? But there is a knowing, we'll call it gnosis, right? We'll separate knowing in that way, technical knowing, from gnosis, which is knowledge from direct experience, and usually associated with spiritual truths, things that we get downloads from spirit, or symbols that come up from our unconscious, which is a connection to spirit, right? So there is a way to tap into this metaphoric language in which we are profoundly affected, but maybe beyond words for us. It may be ineffable, right? Unnameable, beyond words for us to describe. And there is deep work that can be done there, right? We don't have to. I was doing some work with a client the other night, for example, and we were doing some of this work where we're just pulling up metaphors, pure metaphor. She's like, well, I think this means, I'm like, you don't have to know what it means. Just experience the metaphor and the effect that it has on you, right? So, trying to think of a good example of this. So we see a stop sign, for example, right? A red stop sign. We know what that means and we can explain it, but you don't have to, in your mind, you don't have to go, oh, I need to stop here. There's a stop sign. Stop signs are red. They're octagonal. They have the word stop on them. They mean that I need to stop before the stop. We don't have to do that, right? Because we have embodied all of that knowledge already. We've taken that, hopefully. Some drivers around here, not so much, but hopefully we've taken that in, right? And there's a whole, and again, everything that we have, every bit of meaning that we have has all of this linkages. Everything's connected to everything, right? So if I say the word dog to you, I might be thinking of my dog, or I might be thinking of another dog, or the species of dog in general. But if I say the word dog to you, you know what I mean, right? You know, it's generally a four-legged creature with a tail and big ears and a snout and canines, and they're mammals and all of these things. You don't have to go there verbally in your mind to understand what dog is. Dog is just a symbol for dogs. And you'll have all of these linkages to dogs you've known, dogs you've encountered, dogs on TV. I remember watching Lassie when I was a kid, and Benji, and there were a lot more, I don't know, it seems like there were a lot more movies and TV centered around dogs when I was a kid. Maybe that was a phase. Cartoon dogs, right? There's all of these linkages that happen, these synapses, and we can explore that, and it will give us a sense of the structure of the arrangement of our unconscious mind. There's a particular, my mouth isn't quite caught up to my brain yet. There's a particular shamanic exercise which my teacher would have us do, which involved journeying to a spirit garden. So it was a garden representing the state of your soul, and looking around, and everybody's garden is different. And this is metaphoric space. I actually treat metaphoric space as almost like it's a real place, right? It's as real as anything I can experience, but the stuff there is metaphoric. This garden is a metaphor for what's going on inside me, right? So if I go there and it's a place, it's like a location in my consciousness, and I can go there and check things out. And oh my God, the garden's got overgrown, and there's a fountain in the garden, and it's clogged up with stuff. Do I know exactly what that means? Do I know that the overgrown garden means I'm taking too much on, or whatever? No, I don't, and it doesn't matter. I know that there's something there that needs my attention, and I can take care of it in metaphoric space, and it will reflect back. It will make those connections for me. And this is a really powerful tool. There are many, many very powerful tools, many ways to use metaphors for healing, for communicating with our unconscious, which is where all of that healing needs to take place. So another really great exercise, and I certainly didn't invent this, and I don't know where it came from, is to go out in nature somewhere, sit by a lake, go out in the woods, wherever it is, but someplace you can sit and spend some time and take in the landscape. This is a great way to connect with nature, by the way. Take in the landscape and look at what's around you and make connections. Say, what in this landscape would represent me? Oh, this tree represents me because it's strong and lush and whatever comes to you. And what represents the people in your life? What other objects? Oh, there's this rock over here, and that represents my friend who's always there for me. They're a rock, and this and that and this and that. And how do they relate to each other? And this is a way to open up metaphor, but also to connect with nature. It's a way to create these meaningful connections. Again, we don't have to be able to put them all into words to have powerful, meaningful experiences that communicate with our unconscious. There's some really great thought in I forget exactly what it's called. It's called like pure language or something like this. That's probably not it. But there's this beautiful way of eliciting what's inside of people. And don't go off and think like I'm going to give you like a 2-second explanation for something. So don't like go off and think that you can just like become a therapist with this. You can't. But there's a great way to elicit people's metaphors and get them out of people. And the idea is when you're doing work like this, you want to go with whatever. You don't want to overthink anything. You want to go with what comes up first, right? The first thing that comes up is what your unconscious is presenting to you. Then your conscious mind can interfere and go, no, that's not quite right. Let me do this. Let me do this. Let me think about this. Let me find something better. Let me judge this. Let me, don't do that. Shut that shit down, right? Shut it down. Don't do it. But so somebody says to me, I'm going to not use a real example because I don't want to talk about client stuff too much. But somebody says to me, I'm having a hard time with this person who is, I don't know, sorry, I'm trying to think of a really good example here that is anonymized and also would serve. I feel like I'm always failing. Somebody says to me, I feel like I'm always failing. I said, okay, you feel like you're always failing. I'm going to repeat their language back to them because it's important. You feel like you're always failing. Failing like what? That's the key question. Like what? And they might come up with another like concrete, when I try really hard and I don't get what I want. You don't get what you want, like what? Oh, like I feel like, and eventually you'll start getting metaphors. Well, it's like, or you can ask, that's like what? oh, well, it's like a toddler who's trying to walk for the first time and keeps falling and gets really frustrated. A toddler. Tell me, and then you dive in, tell me more about this toddler, right? And you start to get these richer, deeper information, people's metaphors come up. And um, the really important part is not about my understanding somebody's metaphors, although, it helps me to communicate with people's unconscious minds when I have can use their metaphors back with them and use their language back with them, when I can understand, you know, what people are talking about. Particularly, sometimes people's language will start to come from a younger part of themselves, and that's really interesting as well when that comes up. Um, and what's more important than me being able to grasp somebody's metaphors or getting hold of them, which is again also important, is they will start to get insights. But the insights will be not so much, again, this verbal information, this verbal digital information. Oh, I said toddler. This means that my childhood, this happened and this happened. No, it's not so much like that. There are these aha moments, these moments of gnosis, these moments of realization, understanding. You can feel them when they happen, right? You can feel a clarity. Very often when I do this with people who are in a stuck emotional state, and there's a metaphor, right? A stuck emotional state. Start listening for the metaphors in people's language, and especially when people talk about non-physical things in very physical ways, right? Like being stuck emotionally, unable to budge. What kind of metaphor am I using there? Being stuck. It's very kinesthetic, right? We can feel being stuck. It's very physical, right? Or when we describe it's like it dawned on me, right? It dawned, something dawned on me. It's like seeing the dawn. It's like seeing the sun rising on me and being light. It's a very visual metaphor, right? People will use their submodalities, which are their preferred methods of sort of thinking about things that involve senses, right? Someone will say, I see what you're saying. You see what I'm saying, right? That because they do. That's their preferred. They're making pictures in their mind. Or I hear what you're saying, or I can feel that. We have all these different ways of saying we understand. Hello, good morning to you. Or it's not morning where you are, but good whatever part of day it is where you are. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. But listen in conversation, listen for the metaphors, listen for the submodalities. Now here's a tip. Kira says, hello, Brienne. Here's a tip for you. If somebody communicates their preferred method of understanding, use that in communication. If somebody is using lots of visual language, I see what you're saying here. Let's look at this further. They're using lots of visual language. Make sure you're communicating to them in visual terms. Although people will switch modalities, they'll say, "Oh, what a bright idea! I really feel that." That feels weird to me saying that, but some people will switch modalities. Brienne says hello. Welcome. I love doing these things. I feel like my peeps I know in real life and my peeps I know online come. I mean, new people come in, sure, but I love seeing the peeps that I know here. So it's delightful to have you all, and I'm glad you're joining in. Where was I? I'm easily distracted this morning. this brain of mine. Um, um, so listen to how people. Here's a pro tip: listen to how people communicate their preferred submodalities and try to use them, and it will create a greater understanding between you. Listen to people's language. Listen to people's metaphors. So there was something interesting. I was listening to a linguist that I follow, who talks about lot like should have been a linguist. I don't know, but I love listening to linguists talk about things and people who I follow. Another guy who is a language specialist who specializes in the Bible and biblical languages and things like that, and it's fascinating when he talks about the Bible and what people actually believe versus what it actually says and that sort of thing. But regardless, listening to this linguist, and he basically said that everybody uses language in a unique way, meaning the way that I use English, which is pretty much the only language I speak, smatterings of other languages, but nothing fluent. The only language that I speak is English, but the way that I use it is completely unique. No other person on this planet uses English in exactly the same way I do, and that is true for every English speaker. We have our idiomatic languages. They're so unique, in fact, that people can, if they have enough texts, whether it's spoken or written, they can determine who created it. So this was how, if you remember the Unabomber, this was how the Unabomber got caught. Konnichiwa. I think that's with an O. But that's cool. That's cool. Konnichiwa to you. But that's just how the Unabomber got caught, right? He wrote his manifesto, a newspaper published it, his brother read it, said, that's exactly how my brother speaks, and called the FBI, and that's how they caught him. Very, very idiomatic. Is that the right word? But very, very much using his own language, right? It's intelligible. You can hopefully understand me when I speak English. If you're an English speaker, hopefully there is enough overlap in the way that we use language that you can understand. So it's what we call mutually intelligible, right? But, you can read Shakespeare and you can read, and yes, there's a time period difference as well, but you can read Shakespeare, who invented words out of whole cloth, by the way. Like so much of our language, so much of the English language was affected by Shakespeare. Even some of our culturally shared metaphors and sayings and things like that come out of Shakespeare. Very influential. But you can read his writing and you can read Stephen King. And it's like yes, there's a time difference, but they're writing in the same language. Oh, you're very welcome. But they're writing in the same, they're both writing in English. They're both writing in modern English. I mean, Shakespeare, I don't know how modern you think it is, but, it is English language as opposed to Old English or Middle English, which was closer, well, it was German actually, was a form of Germanic language, right? Old English. And something like 85% of English that we use is borrowed, right? Words from other languages. This is a real hodgepodge. There's a word for you. I don't know how many people use the word hodgepodge, right? I like some of those older words like hodgepodge, and shenanigans is a favorite of mine. So, but our language and the way that we use it also reflects our method of thinking, and our method of thinking affects our language. It's interesting. I will pay attention to people talking about, whether they're clients or just people in my life, talking about what's going on with them. And one of the things I pay attention to is speaking in Hodgepodge. What's the definition of hodgepodge? Hodgepodge is a mix of things, a real mix, a real toss-up. I don't know the origin of hodgepodge. It might be culinary, but I'm not 100% sure. What was I saying? I completely lost my train of thought. That has happened so much this morning. I don't think I have enough caffeine in me yet. It's been a very long week. I'm like, it's only Thursday. It's not Wednesday of next week yet. It's been a really long, challenging week, and more challenges to come this week, but not looking for sympathy. Just explaining why my brain isn't working. Yes. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yes. You are beyond delightful. Thank you. So when I talk to people, I listen to the language that they use, and very often with clients, with other people I know and whatever, I listen particularly, one of the things I listen to is passive voice, or any way that they have what they're called like a missing performant. The actor in what they're describing is missing. Aren't we? Yeah, I think we're out of Mercury retrograde, right? It's out of the microwave now. Yeah, hopefully. Yes, absolutely. Language and the way we use it, it affects thinking tremendously. And how people use language with us affects us tremendously. So, use people's phrases with them will help with, as long as you're using them appropriately and not mocking them. You can get you'll have better communication. You'll have better emotional connection with them, deeper emotional connection with them. I've seen Igor Ledachovsky, who is one of my favorite hypnotists, working with somebody, and all they're doing is repeating exactly what the person just said and then asking a question. So if somebody says, I went into the store the other day, you went into the store the other day, and then what? And you'll see the person start to go into trance. It's amazing. No formal, what we would consider formal induction. Formal induction is, close your eyes, point your eyeballs up, relax, breathe. I'm not doing a formal induction because I wouldn't do that on a live and be irresponsible to put people in a trance. You may be going into trance anyway. And how would you know if you're not in trance right at this moment? But I don't want anybody to pass out on me or anything, and I'm not there for safety. So listen, one of the things I listen to is missing performant, meaning that the actor is not there, or passive voice. And very often these are ways people are dissociating from the thing that they're talking about, or taking a step back, or not taking responsibility for what's going on. So I know somebody that had lots of struggles with finances, for example, which is really common, and whatever, no judgment about it. But this person would say all the time, well, when the money comes in, I will do this. When the money comes in, I will pay this off. When the money comes in, I will do this. And I'm like, what an interesting phrase, when the money comes in. Like, first of all, we're turning money into something that is the actor, right? Money is the actor here. You're missing the performance. What are you doing to bring the money in? What are you, like, he's missing from the equation. And I think that two things were happening there. One is that he's feeling some shame about the financial situation, so wanting to put some distance between his responsibility for what's going on and the action, but also looking for a way to if it's up to me, I'm really nervous. If it's up to me, so it's not up to me. It's just coming. It's just the money is the actor here in this statement. So there's lots of things going on there. If I were to analyze it and pull it apart, and this was a friend, if I were working with this person as a client, I would say, interesting, the money coming in. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about the money coming in. How is the money coming in? Who's bringing it in? Is it coming in on its own? Is it materializing? Is it manifesting? Is it what, I would just start asking questions based on that language that they're using. And what happens when you start using people's language and their own metaphors, and again, talking about this hypnotist, this watching him working with other people, just using their language and teasing out their metaphors, is that as you start to go deeper, people have to turn inside, right? So did you catch the metaphors in that sentence when I said, or the and the submodalities? So to go deeper, you have to turn inside. Those are both physical actions, going deeper and turning inside. Yes, going deeper is a common metaphor that we use for like going inside and getting more going inside. I can't even speak without throwing up metaphors here, right? So I'm not going to try. But when you start to use people's metaphors with their language with them, they go inside, they go deeper, and start to make sense out of it, even if it's that gnosis, that knowing without putting labels and words to things, this aha realization, these eureka moments. It's a technique that I use a lot with clients when just in talking to them. And when you go to a shamanic healer, I can't tell you what will happen because I think everybody works differently. But one of the things that I was taught was how to use what we call medicine language. Again, that's a metaphor, medicine language, right? It's how to speak with people in a way that is healing. I'm not a therapist, so it's not that. But I use techniques from, I am a certified hypnotherapist, but I use techniques from hypnotherapy when I'm speaking with people. I'm not using hypnotherapy, but I'm using techniques from there to help people understand, to help people make connections to themselves, right? Again, making connection to yourself. I'm using a lot of kinesthetic language today, which tells me that at least this morning, one of my preferred modalities is kinesthetic or touch, right? When I say, and generally speaking, I would say that's true for me. We talk about having all the feels, right? Talk about what's going on kinesthetically. Talk about touch. Touch is one of I don't know how much junk that there's the whole the love languages thing. There's been some criticism of that, like the 5 love languages. I think there's probably, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Very often there may be value there. But even that, like saying language, love languages, right? That's a metaphor because they're not all language. Some of the things like acts of service or touch being a love language, or words of praise is language, but or words of praise, words of appreciation, gifts, those are not necessarily languages, but they are ways that we in the strict term, the strict definition of the word language, but they are ways that we communicate. We have preferred ways of communication. We have preferred ways that we want people to communicate with us. We have phrases that we want to hear, right? Without going too far down this rabbit hole, in intimate settings, there are very often phrases that are triggers for us in intimacy, and not just what is said, but how it's said. and what the context is of how it's said is one example of that, right? But lots of ways I remember I used to have a million years ago, I used to do a lot more photography, and I had a studio in Boston, and I did a lot of portfolio work for models and stuff like that, which is really cool. It's a lot of fun. And I did a lot of fashion photography. I edited a magazine, believe it or not, based on how I'm dressed, probably not. I used to edit a fashion magazine a million years ago, um, which is cool. I got to go to like the most amazing parties ever. But that was a former life. It really was. It really was like it almost seems like it wasn't me when I think back, but it was a long time, well before I had children and all of that. But so I had studio space in a building that was all artist studios, and it was really cool. There were all of these different artists. There were, one in the hall, there were glass blowers, cool stuff, people doing encaustic painting, whatever. But there was another photographer who was there, who I was doing more like commercial fashion photography, that sort of stuff. But there was another photographer who was there who was like a fine art photographer, a very successful fine art photographer. And he had done this pic, and he had a large scale photo printer. That's how successful he was. He had a $10,000 photo printer in his studio, where he could print these huge photos out and then frame them and stuff. He had this photo. I remember he took this little, it was a figurine of like a chimpanzee, and it was grinning, and you could see like its fangs and stuff. And he put it in a jar of colored water, and he shot it with this special macro lens, all the stuff, and then blew it up huge. I mean, it was like 4 by 5 feet on the wall, just this like grinning, fearsome looking chimpanzee. And I was like, oh, that's kind of scary. That's kind of a scary thought. He goes, yeah. He goes, my brother is a producer in Hollywood, and he has this hanging behind his desk. I was like, oh, interesting. I bet he's got a large desk in front of him. Yeah. So and this was conscious on his part, his visual language, and many people who are artists or, in film or whatever, very, very good at using visual language to represent things. His visual language was one of intimidation. He wanted people coming into his office as a producer to be intimidated by him. And he specifically picked the artwork and the desk and the setting and the whole thing to reflect all of that. And my guess is that most people would not be conscious that that was happening, but that it was, but that's exactly what was happening. And one of the exercises that I learned in some of my coaching practice is to have a client. You can do this on your own. Go around in your environment. So, pick one room at a time, and look at everything in that room one at a time, and see how it makes you feel. Right? See how it makes you feel. And if things in there make you feel low energy, scared, angry, whatever, in a way that you don't want to feel, it might be a good idea to think about removing them or moving them or covering them or whatever. So you're not having this unconscious symbology affecting you in negative ways. So something to think about anyway. I've done this in small scale ways. I've done this with, I've had clients doing this with sort of great effect as well. It's really a small exercise in decluttering as well, which I need to go through decluttering. I really need to go through decluttering. I'm in a phase where like, I think particularly if you're going through like big changes in your life, I'm going through like some really large changes in my life right now. And I think decluttering is a great thing to do at that point in time, sort of clear the space, right, and that sort of thing. I'm really bad at it. I have ADHD, so decluttering is like a nightmare for me, because I pick something up and I look at it and then I get involved with it and then I get hyper focused on it and then I realize like 2 hours have gone by and I haven't gotten rid of anything yet. Every once in a while, I do a purge. I've taken probably a couple thousand books in for donation. I have a lot of books. I was showing somebody one of my bookshelves last night, going through my books on a video chat. They're like, "Show me your bookshelf." I'm like, "Okay, here you go." Down the rabbit hole, there's a metaphor, right? And that comes from Alice in Wonderland. Down the rabbit hole we go, or through the looking glass we go. But yeah, absolutely. Language is symbolic. All language is symbolic. Even the most natural, non-metaphoric sounding language is symbolic, because every word is a symbol for something else. Every word is symbolic for whatever it is that it's meant to take the place of, right? So if I say dog or shoe or whatever the nouns are. But then we have these complex, we have these things called nominalizations, which are nouns that we can't put in a wheelbarrow. Things like depression, things like excitement, things, not just feelings, but any processes that we can't put in a wheelbarrow, but they're nouns. We treat them like things. It's interesting to listen to people's nominalizations as well and see what they're sort of solidifying actions sometimes, or solidifying processes, or solidifying what's going on. Right. Yeah, the things are symbols in your life. Yes. It is hard. Yeah, it's hard to declutter. Absolutely. Grieving the past, it can be hard to let go of things that connect in that way, for sure. Yeah, things can be very symbolic. Anything, right, can remind us of I can remember when I bought these coffee cups. I can remember that, does this bring you joy? Declutter doesn't work. So they ask themselves, if this had poop on it, would you clean it or keep it? Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty, that is, I have not heard that, but that is a really great, that's a really great way to think about it. I think most things in my life I would probably throw out if, very few things would I keep if that were the case. But I guess if you've had kids and pets, cleaning poop off stuff is not like an abnormal activity. Good morning. My daughter just got up. So yeah, that's really funny. That's a really great way to think about it. So if this coffee cup had poop in it, it would go. It would be gone. I would never drink out of that again, for sure. But also, having kids and pets, you get used to dealing with poop. I never thought I would be like okay with that, but whatever. After so many having twins too, after having so many diaper changes, you're like, whatever. You learn to deal with lots of gross stuff, I guess. I'm really very easily sidetracked today, but thank you for that. That's really great. Yeah, I think that was the whole Marie Kondo thing, right? Does this spark joy? And I think she's moved away from that, from what I hear. Like I think she's not really doing that anymore. And then she had this like all these rules, like and I'm sure I'm sure her stuff worked for some people, to some extent. It would not work for me really, that well. It's just like, you should have, like, for what it is, there's some rule about how many books you're supposed to own you should strive to have no more than 15 books or something like that, or 30 books. I'm like, I've got hundreds, maybe thousands of books, and I'm not getting rid of any of them. I mean, I will purge every so often. I'll go through. I'm like, I'm not reading this again. I'm no reason to keep this, but I'm definitely a hoarder when it comes to books. Got a lot of books in my life. I have many bookshelves. How many bookshelves do I own? It's pretty bad when you don't know how many bookshelves you own. But I own a lot. So anyway, we've been talking about symbol and metaphor and ways of communicating with our unconscious to have realizations. And I do think, like I've mentioned this a few times, I do think it's important to understand that realizations are not always digital verbal information, meaning, oh, this means X and this means Y and this means, we don't have to necessarily make that kind of meaning from our metaphors. We can just get meaning, right? So, for example, there's a hotel a couple towns over from me, and they have a stop sign at one of the exits of their driveway, so people don't drive into traffic. But it doesn't say stop; it says "whoa," which I think is funny. That cracked me up a little bit. But do people still understand that that's a stop sign? Of course they do, right? They don't have to like stop. Okay, what does this mean? It doesn't have the word stop on it. It has the word whoa. I can connect that with horses. If you've watched, movies about horses, if you have horses, or I don't know if people use use the word whoa. I've heard whoa back with people driving teams of horses before, but interesting factoid: the word hello was actually first coined in the 1800s as a way to greet people over the telephone. And the original, like the Alexander Graham Bell, the original proposal when you picked up the telephone was to say ahoy, like they do on ships, ahoy. I'm going to do that from now on. I'm going to answer my phone with ahoy. But hello apparently is connected to the word holla, like holla back girl from Gwen Stefani. But holla was something that people would yell at each other across ships and things like that. So interesting linguistic factoid I learned very recently. But hello is not, as a term, is not that old as far as the English language goes, and was sort of coined for use over the telephone as a way to tell people you were there on the other end of the line. Hello. Now we use it, of course, hello, or we shorten it to hi. I don't really use hi on the phone too much, right? We tend to use hello. I don't know. Or how are you? But it's interesting. And there was I did years ago, I was doing a guest lecture on marketing. I have a degree in marketing, believe it or not, a master's degree in marketing, actually. I was doing a guest lecture at a college here on marketing for a business class. And I came in and I had some slides. And one of the slides was a picture of a Coca-Cola bottle from Japan, right? And so it was a glass bottle, and in Japanese, it said Coca-Cola or Keiko-Cola, whatever, however they pronounce it in Japan. Said Coca-Cola, but in Japanese characters. And I showed up on the screen and I said, what is this? It was just a glass bottle. There was nothing in it. It was empty. And everyone's like, oh, it's a Coca-Cola bottle. And I said, okay, well, who in this room reads Japanese? And nobody raised their hand. So how do you know this is a Coca-Cola bottle? Well, because the shape, right, is distinctive. The shape is really distinctive. In fact, the shape, I can't remember if it's I think there's a design patent on the shape of the Coca-Cola bottle. Let's bring back ahoy matey. I agree. I'm going to start using that. I'm going to where's I don't have my pirate hat here. I went to a party a few weeks back. It was a pirate themed barbecue. So I own a tri-cornered hat and dressed like a pirate and made bad pirate puns. Shivered some timbers, let's put it that way. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of we have a lot of nautical terms that are mixed in with our language as well. Stem to stern and I can't think of them all now, but there's a list of stuff that come from nautical terms, ship shape, things like that. So you have a lot of idioms and metaphors that way. But anyway, so everybody recognized the picture that I showed as a Coca-Cola bottle. Why? Because the symbol was so strong. And this is branding is a really important part of marketing, right? Like they've shown logos, and I remember this when my children were little. They show logos to kids who can't read yet, and they recognize the companies they come from. If it's something they're familiar with. And I remember going somewhere with my children before they were able to read. They were maybe 2 or something, and we pulled into a parking lot. Maybe it was for Target or something like that. And they're like, "We're at Target." How do you know? Because the logo, right? Because it's symbolic and we have these associations with it. And there was a really cool thing that they did. Some company made, I don't know if they're still doing stuff like this, but some company made a lot of marketing, a lot of dollars as a marketing consultant. And what they would do is they would have people, I guess they probably don't do this too much anymore with this way, but they were like, we want you to think about our product. We'll say Coca-Cola was one that did this. They're like, think about the Coca-Cola and go through all of these magazines and cut out pictures that remind you of Coca-Cola and how it makes you feel and this and that. And then put them together in a collage. Like, here's a glue stick, here's magazines, go through it all. And it was really interesting. One of the collages that I still remember this to this day, that somebody put together for Coca-Cola was a Zen monk meditating in the middle of a soccer field with people playing soccer around them. And it was done not in the US, so that makes a difference. It was done in a place where soccer is more common. And they're like, okay, can you explain this? Can you get into this metaphor and explain what this is? And they're like, well, Coca-Cola, it's got, it picks you up. It's exciting, like a soccer game. But I also drink it when I'm relaxing. And so it is a way of me calming myself, like a Zen monk. So it had this whole dichotomy that was captured in this really sort of metaphorical image. You can do that as well. I realize magazines aren't necessarily, as I know, I was in the magazine business, as popular as they once were. But you can, if you're trying to get some insight into something in your life, you think about it and then go out and don't look for specific pictures, but every time something comes up online, copy it into a folder. You can use some software. There's free software out there. You can make collages out of things, or you can print it out and cut and paste or whatever. And you can start to build some really deep meaning there. My daughters have made collages for me that are absolutely brilliant and just combine sort of like, this is what we think of you, and they're beautiful, and I have them framed and just absolutely touching and lovely, and they're really, really good at it. They're really amazing at it. So it is one way, if you're not into drawing, painting, that even if you are, you can still do this exercise. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up for the day. I hope everybody has an absolutely brilliant, beautiful, and excellently divine and divinely excellent day. Thank you to my friends. Thank you to new friends and friends I've seen before for joining in. Thank you all for your contributions, and even your hellos and your good mornings and your LOLs. My love to you all. Doubtful I'm going to get to do this again before the weekend. The weekend kind of starts tomorrow, but I might do some more lives over the weekend. We'll see. It is a long weekend here in the US, which is what in other places they might refer to as a bank holiday. Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. No, thank you. Appreciate it. You're so welcome. Thank you too for joining. And